Ryan Thomas at East West here, and welcome to Composing with Hollywood Strings 2 and Hollywood Orchestra. Now, this video is going to be super straightforward. We are going to watch a scene that was scored entirely with Hollywood Strings 2 and other Hollywood series instruments, and then we'll break it down. Now, the idea here is to illustrate just how seamlessly Hollywood Strings 2 integrates with the other Hollywood series instruments, and also give you some tips and tricks that you can use to use all of these libraries together. And we're also going to demonstrate just how incredibly agile Hollywood Strings 2 can be in a more technically demanding stylistic context. So let's go ahead and watch the scene, and then we'll break down the soundtrack. So here it is. All right, so let's go ahead and start right up at the top with these really snappy string runs. And I'm using a combination of the staccato slur articulation, for example, in the cello, with the staccato runs down in some of the high strings. So let's go ahead and hear the strings by themselves. So you have those runs starting off in the high strings and then being continued in the low strings. Now after that, you just have the basses and the cello coming in on this really simple ostinato pattern that's going to be supporting the melody in the French horns. And if you'll notice, the cello are playing the slightly more complicated pattern here, and that's just going to help to clear up the mix a little bit. So let's go ahead and hear the cello and the basses by themselves. So I have the spiccato articulation triggered, and it's just really crisp, and it just sounds absolutely perfect in this context. Really works for this kind of writing. So let's go ahead and hear everything together so you can hear just how seamlessly Hollywood Strings 2 is working with these other Hollywood series instruments, notably the two French horns from Hollywood Brass. So those really crisp spiccatos in the cello and the basses are just creating so much space in the mix for the French horns, and you just get a really dramatic effect from that. Now in the next phrase, the French horn melody is being passed to the first and second violins, and I'm using a combination of the spiccato and détaché articulations. And the détachés just have this incredible energy. There's a lot of vibrato, and they were perfect for this melody line. So let's hear the strings by themselves. Now there's also a moving line in the violas and another section of the second violins. So let's check out what's going on there. And I'm just using the staccato slur articulation for both of these. So let's hear what they sound like together. And now let's hear everything together. So one of the advantages to those smaller sections is that you can do things like write multiple lines in the second violins, and it's not going to overwhelm the mix. It's not going to cause things to become too dense. So let's go ahead and check out the next phrase. And we're starting it off with these kind of frantic runs in the first and second violins, along with this line in the tremolo violas. And I have enabled the legato mode for those. And then I am punctuating the ends of those runs with some spiccatos in the first and second violin key switches. So those staccato runs are just really ideal for this application, when you need a really snappy and energetic run. Now, after that, you kind of have this ascending ostinato line in the first and second violins. Now, I have doubled those with the full strings shorts mod patch with only the mid, main, and surround mics enabled. So you just kind of get a little bit more of a full sound. So let's go ahead and hear this line. So again, we're just using that full string shorts patch to give a little bit more body to those first and second violins. So now let's go ahead and hear the full orchestra. Now in this next section, we're introducing the bow change legato articulation, and that's going to be ideal for these faster moving legato lines that aren't necessarily runs. So I have the first and second violins, as well as the violas in the lower octave, playing this line here against some shorts in the violas and celli. So let's go ahead and hear this section with just the strings. So that's definitely going to be an ideal application for those bow change legatos. Then for this section at 32, I'm just key switching between the spiccato, staccato, and legato bow change articulations. So let's go ahead and hear this section with the full orchestra, and we'll start a couple bars out. Now, this next section features a really strong melody line in the first and second violin, so I needed a very full sound here. So I went ahead and doubled both the first and second violin, the legato slur from the key switch patch, with the legato slur molto, and it's a slightly different mic mix as well. And that molto stands for molto vibrato. So let's go ahead and hear this melody line by itself. And I really appreciate how crisp and defined those note repetitions are. Now, another thing that you can do if you're using this technique is just pan the tracks slightly differently. So for this second violin track, I pan it -13. And then for the legato slur molto, I panned it -17. So again, you just get a slightly fuller sound that way. Then you also have this ostinato line in the violas and the celli, and these are just going to be all spiccato. And it just goes on like that through the entire section. Then when the celli take over that melody line from the violins, the first and second violins are now on this crazy arpeggiated legato line. And I did go ahead and layer the first violin's bow change legato with the first violin's playable run trill patch. So let's go ahead and hear this phrase. And I actually found that in this context, layering the bow change legato patch with the playable runs patch just gives you a slightly looser feeling, which I did want in this section because that would be a pretty difficult line to play. So I wanted it to feel just a little bit more chaotic than it otherwise would have been with just the bow change legato patch. Then to finish out this phrase, you've got this descending arpeggio in the first and second violins along with the violas, and I'm using the staccato runs down in the violins and the staccato slur articulation in the violas. And these are going to resolve on a tremolo, and the basses and the celli are just going to be playing these simple sustains. So let's go ahead and hear this section. And now let's hear that entire phrase with the rest of the orchestra. So contrary to what you might expect, working with these smaller section sizes can actually give you a more cinematic, a more dramatic sound, especially with these denser orchestrations, because it allows you to write more intricate parts without cluttering up the mix or the soundscape. Now, this next section is pretty straightforward. I think I'm using spiccato all the way through, but you have these very light velocities, so it kind of gives you this fluttering effect. And now let's hear that in context. Now, this next phrase is going to start with these really frantic runs in the first and second violins, and I'm just using the staccato runs up patches for both of those, but I am punctuating the ends of those runs with the spiccato from both the first and second violins key switch patches. So let's just hear the violins by themselves. And then you've got this really cool line in the violas that's going to be playing against those runs in the violins. And we're using the viola's staccato runs down patch for that. Then the high strings are going to trade off playing those runs with the low strings, and the violins are going to be playing the same line that the violas were playing. And you've got the basses playing these stabs here along with the brass. Now, this next part of the phrase is going to feature another sort of call and response between the high strings and the low strings. So you've got violin 1 and 2 playing this line here, and then it's being passed to the cello at measure 77, with the violas just playing this very simple ostinato line, and these are all just going to be spiccato. And then you also have the pizzicato strings coming in, and you've got the low strings pizzicatos coming in at 72, and then the high strings pizzicatos coming in about halfway through measure 78. So let's go ahead and hear all of the strings together in this section. And now let's go back and hear this entire phrase in context with the rest of the orchestra. Now, this next phrase is going to pretty heavily feature the playable run trill patch, which is just an absolutely incredible articulation. And you've got the first and second violins all playing the same run here, just to make it sound full and to make it pop. And then I've also layered this run with the first violin's legato bow change. The only other string content here is going to be the cello and the basses playing these stabs. The melody here is actually in the French horns. So here are the strings. And now let's hear the strings with the full orchestra, and we'll start a couple bars out for context. And you can hear how well Hollywood Strings 2 is blending with the woodwinds from Hollywood Orchestral Woodwinds on those ascending runs. Now, this next phrase starts off with the violas and the cello joining the brass at measure 91, and then the full strings come in at measure 95 with this run in the violins. And I'm just using the first violin's staccato runs up patch for that. And the key switching here is just going back and forth between the spiccato and then the détaché. So let's go ahead and hear the strings by themselves. And now let's hear it with full orchestra. And we'll start a couple bars out for context. So again, those détachés are really ideal for those very dramatic, bold string lines. They have a ton of vibrato, and they're just very crisp. Now, this next part is pretty straightforward. You've got all these ostinato lines. Everything is pretty much just spiccato. And you do also have these runs in the violins. And again, these are going to be the staccato runs up. And now let's hear it with the full orchestra. Again, we're going to take it 2 bars out. Now, in this last phrase, we're bringing back a variation of a melody from earlier in the piece, and that's going to be played by the first and second violins with the legato slur molto patches. You've got some ostinato string content, those are going to be spiccatos, and then, of course, you've got some sustains in the celli and the basses. And I should point out that at measure 111, rather than spiccato ostinato lines, we're going to have these moving legato lines using the bow change legato patches. So you're still going to have movement, but rather than spiccato, it's going to be legato. So let's go ahead and hear the strings by themselves at 107. And now let's hear it with the full orchestra. So that is Hollywood Strings 2 in context, and as you heard, it really does blend beautifully with the other Hollywood series instruments. And, you know, this isn't just a vibey, intimate chamber string orchestra. It can really do so much more. It's incredibly agile. It excels even in these more traditional, very technically demanding contexts. So Hollywood Strings 2 is available for sale on our website right now as a standalone purchase. It's also just part of the Composer Cloud Plus subscription, which is an absolutely insane value. So if you liked this video, don't forget to like it, drop a comment, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any future content. That's all for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.